Okay, welcome to the 5 keys to building a brilliant biotech. I am going to talk you through about a third of the strategy that you need to create a really successful biotech company. The rest of it you'll have to take care of for yourself. But if you can give me about an hour, I can give you a third of the plan, which sounds like a pretty good deal. So before we start, this is me. My name's Tom Froggatt. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Singular. And we work with biotech companies, particularly seed to Series B stage biotech companies, from startup to usually a couple of hundred people, on people and culture, essentially, on how to build brilliant teams, on how to bring in the right people, on how to engage them, develop them, and retain them. And that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to share our secret formula. I use this framework in my business at Singular. I use it with all of my clients, and I use it in the charities I run and other businesses that I advise. So it's really broadly applicable to any kind of business, but we specifically tailor it to biotech companies. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. So why a third of the strategy? Why a third of the plan? Well, there are 3 pillars as we see it to biotech success. And this is obviously very simplified. But to build a successful biotech company, you need 3 things. You need great science. And when I say great science, I don't just mean stuff that works. That's obviously part of it, but also things that are something that's going to make a real difference to patients, that's going to meet a real unmet need, or really move the needle in terms of the treatment options that are available to people. Incremental change isn't going to be the thing that will win you great success. It's about significant change. You need money, of course, to fund it, and particularly in therapeutics companies where you are years away from delivering a therapy to patients and actually recouping some of that money you've spent. That comes in the form of external funding, typically. And you need great people and a great culture. Now, for most biotech founders, their skill set is in one of the first 2. And the science and money parts of their business are so demanding and demand so much of their time and attention that although they understand that the people and culture pillar is critical, they don't necessarily have the expertise all the time to focus on it. And this, in the end, is why some biotech companies end up failing. Of course, science failing is a big part of it. Running out of money is another reason that companies fail. But I would argue that both of those are overcomable challenges if your people pillar is strong and your culture is strong. Um, there are some real tangible impacts as well to not looking after the people and culture in your company. So first of all, if you make the wrong hire, you've got significant costs attached to that, monetary cost. On average, we estimate that the cost of a bad hire is just under £40,000, but that's based on the UK average wage in biotech, £47,500, and that includes quite a lot of big companies that have more junior employees. Chances are, if you're in that seed to Series B biotech category, your average salary is going to be significantly higher, which will drive up the tangible cost. But it's not just the monetary cost. It's also the cost in terms of the management time that's spent on recruiting, on training people. A poor hire impacts productivity, not just in their role, but also across the team, because people are having to pick up the slack for them, but also they can be disruptive. And they have a significantly negative impact on teamwork and morale. There's lots of research been done into the impact of poor performers on high performing teams. The initial theory was that if you put a poor performer into a high performing team, then they would raise their bar and they'd meet the standard of that team. Actually, the opposite happens, and typically the standards of the team come down. So it's not just the individual, it's their impact on the team as a whole. And even if you get your hires right, even if it's not a bad hire, losing people also costs money. The UK average cost, according to HMRC, of losing an employee is £30,000. And the average biotech salary is significantly higher than the UK average salary. So you'd expect it to be higher again. And as I said on the previous slide, your average salary is probably going to be even higher. So the monetary cost, again, is significant. Even if you've got a good couple of years out of that person and then they leave. And there's also the same impact on the intangibles, on the time and on the morale side of things. And the impact on morale and teamwork is often different in this scenario, in that, in a small company, you can't really afford to build redundancy into your teams. So often when someone leaves, the knowledge goes with them, and they might be well liked as well. But also, everybody starts recruiting too late. And so actually, you don't end up replacing that person until well after they've left, typically. And so you're losing intellectual capital when you lose that person as well. Um, Even if they stay, if you don't engage your employees, there's still a significant impact. So disengaged employees cost about £3,500 to companies for every £10,000 that they make. And that's driven by a higher rate of absenteeism and also lower productivity when they're there. So even if people aren't leaving your company, then if they're not engaged and they're not highly productive, then they will be impacting your performance. But there's a positive side to this as well. If you can engage your teams, highly engaged teams, depending on who you believe, between 20 and 40% more productive than just normally engaged teams, or teams with a normal level of engagement. So imagine what 20 to 40% more productivity would mean to you. And in tangible terms, that means you achieving your milestones more quickly. And the actual monetary reward for that is, on average, in UK VC funded biotech, £18.2 million. That was the average round raised in Q3 2023, which is the latest quarter that we have data for right now. So if you can engage your team, there's significant benefit to that as well. But as well as the more tangible, or the more sort of day-to-day impacts, there's a more fundamental element that makes getting your people and culture right really important. So biotech is littered with stories of science going wrong. And in fact, in therapeutics, as you'll probably know, something like 95% of all programs fail. So the chances are that your science is going to fail. And certainly there's a good chance that even if it's successful, it's not going to look like it does now. The difference between success and failure when that happens is the team that you create. I went and looked for examples of biotech companies where the science had failed, but they'd still become successful. And there was tons of them. I had to pick the ones that were best known for the purposes of this. So, we've got Genentech, Amgen, and Vertex here, who are three of the biggest success stories in biotech of the last couple of decades. All of them had significant scientific failures. In the case of Vertex, in fact, a late stage clinical failure on their lead program, which almost destroyed the company. Obviously, those things had a major impact on the dynamic of the business and the trajectory of the business, but they were all able to rally and pivot and become successful. And the reason for that is they built incredible teams and very, very strong cultures. And so your team and the culture that you create around it may be the difference between your company surviving one of these crises and not. So how do you create a brilliant people and culture pillar in your business? Well, there are 5 keys. There are 5 things that you need to focus on in order to make your business as strong as possible in that area. 2 of them are the foundation. 2 of them are the pillars that sit on top of it. And then the 5th is the thread that weaves through it. So we start with vision, mission, and purpose, and values. Those are the 2 cultural foundations that you build your organization on. On top of those, great talent acquisition and brilliant culture and employee experience are essential. And woven through all of that is the thread of systems, processes, and measurements. So putting the right infrastructure in place, putting repeatable processes that you can use to measure the impact of what you're doing and therefore adjust. So I'm going to take you through, each of these is a big topic, but I'm going to take you through the fundamentals, the basics of each of these areas that you can start to look at in your business. So starting with vision, mission, and purpose. Now, this is not your objectives and your milestones. Most biotech companies are pretty clear on what those are, but they often don't think to look beyond objectives and milestones to the longer term, bigger picture. Mission is all about the impact that you'll have if your company is successful. Purpose is about why it's important and why you individually care about it. In a small company, you have to transfer your passion for what you're doing to the people that you're bringing into the company. And if you don't do that, it's not going to come from anywhere else. And the vision is what it'll look like if you're successful. So a lot of companies, not just in the biotech sector, miss this. They don't paint a compelling picture for their employees of what the future looks like, and therefore they make it more difficult for their team to align their own future with that of the company. Now, vision, mission, and purpose are really critical because they drive individual performance and they drive retention. So individuals who really connect to a company's mission or the company's purpose are 54% more likely to stay for at least 5 years, which in today's world is a very long time. And they're 30% more likely to grow into high performers. So the return on mission, vision, and purpose is huge. Now, to give you an example, at Singular, our mission is that we believe biotech companies spend far too much time, energy, and money on hiring and people issues. So we help them to build and engage their teams more effectively so that they can focus on developing drugs, treating patients, and saving lives. We also help biotech professionals to get what they want from their career because it has such a huge impact on their job satisfaction, their career goals, their earning potential, and their happiness. And you'll see, in this mission statement, there are elements of purpose woven through this as well. It's often hard to separate the two. Our vision for the company in the long-term future is that we want to build a company that connects people to work and companies to talent across the world. We want to create an ecosystem that tackles both talent shortages and involuntary unemployment. We strongly believe that those two things shouldn't coexist. We understand the reasons why they do. We're not naive about it, but we don't think they should. So we want to have an impact on that. We want to, as a result of that, or as an element of that, enable remote working globally. And this was part of our vision before the pandemic, before COVID arrived and made everyone work remotely. That just helps us along a little bit. We want to help people to get what they want from their careers, and we want to help grow companies that change lives. Now, at the moment, we're very focused on biotech. That may well change in the future. We may well expand our reach, but it will always be focusing on companies that change lives for the better and positively impact the human experience. So we've created this vision of what people are contributing to and the impact that we'll have in the long term. Now, we don't put a date on this. This is a long-term vision. It might take us 20 years to achieve this. And we don't know all the steps as to how we're going to achieve it, but we know broadly where we're heading and the difference that we want to make. But we make that more defined as well as we come in closer in terms of time. So we also want to build a global organization with physical locations and remote hubs across the world. We want a business that combines the power of people and technology to help create that future. And we want to build a company that drives career, professional, and personal development, giving our people the best learning experience of their lives. And finally, we want to grow profitably and impactfully. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about what does the company look like and feel like, and what does it sound like, and what do people experience within the company. And it's really important that you do the same. The clearer a picture your team can see of what your company will be like in the future, the more likely they are to be able to see themselves as part of that picture. And that, of course, drives retention. It also drives discretionary effort because there'll be a long-term thinking that they do, and there'll be a long-term connection that they make to where they might go with the company. From your overall vision, mission, and purpose, it's good practice to break that down then into more tangible outcomes and objectives. So we have a 10-year vision within that. We then break that down into 3-year goals for the organization. Both the company and everybody within it then have 1-year outcomes, so 1-year targets that they're aiming for. These are broken down into 90-day objectives, again, both for the organization and the individual. And that then breaks down into performance reviews monthly, kickoff meetings weekly, all that kind of thing. And so, we use that thread from the vision all the way down to the individual objectives for the next 90 days to make sure that what everyone's doing is aligned to where we're going. And it also makes it really clear what people need to do and what's in it for them, both short term and long term. So by painting that picture, by starting to focus on that mission and purpose and vision, you not only drive engagement and retention, but you can make sure that your performance, what people are doing in your company, drives your performance. So that is our sort of recommended structure for getting your goals aligned and getting your mission and vision and purpose in place. So that's one part of your foundation. The second part of your foundation is values. And when I talk about values, there's often some confusion about this. Now, values in big companies are often kind of abstract words that are on the wall in a lot of places. They've been put in place by the management team. Some people kind of think they know what they mean, but they might disagree on it. They may be lived in the company, they may not. The best companies, there's real clear alignment of values with the behavior that happens. Um, but in a lot of companies, they aren't as part of the fabric as they should be. So values, from a leadership point of view, are really the levers that you use to influence your culture. So you've got your mission and vision and purpose in place. There are lots of ways you could achieve that. And actually, none of them is necessarily better than the other. You might have preferences around what's important in your company. You might not want to build an aggressive, competitive, dog eat dog culture, but some companies do, and they're very successful with that. So there's no judgment around values. There are just different ways to achieve the things that you want to achieve. And so values are very much the how of your plan. They also allow you to influence and design the culture. So you can't control culture in your organization. As soon as there are more people in the company than there are in the founding team no longer has control of the culture. And actually, there's an argument to say as soon as you hire your first person, you're no longer in control, because those people will influence and inform the culture and shape it. But what you certainly can, and if you try to control it, what you end up with is a culture of control, which isn't the most productive way to work typically. What you can do is you can certainly influence the direction that that culture grows in. And the way that you influence the culture is through hiring the right people, not people with the right skills, but the right people, by rewarding the right behaviors. That could be financial reward, it could be recognition, or it could be promotion. By weaving the values into how you make decisions, and also by firing people who don't meet your values. So there's lots of different ways you can inform culture with your values or shape culture with your values. And there's been a lot of research done into consumer behavior around values, which shows that 77% of consumers prefer to buy from brands that share their values. Now, that's just for a purchasing decision. If it's an employment decision, I would suspect that the percentage that prefer to work for companies that share their values is significantly higher. It's a much bigger commitment to go and work for Apple than it is to go and buy an iPhone. So your values are the levers that you use to influence that culture that you're creating. So how you define values is by getting your group together, whether that's your founding team or whether that's your company as a whole. I'd recommend getting as many people involved in this as you possibly can, and talking about what is important to you as a group. Perhaps you have values already. How do you interpret those? What are the things within those that resonate with people or that connect with people? And if you don't have them, then you can start from scratch on this. But yeah, start with what's important to you as a group and try to identify the common ground within that. People might be using different words, but you want to identify the common themes and the common trends that come through. You also want to think about, as a group of people, what makes you unique. So this isn't about why your science is unique or what your proposition to investors is. This is about you as a group of individuals. What makes you unique? What values do you hold that wouldn't make sense in another company? Often one of the reasons that values are ineffective is because they don't capture the uniqueness of a company enough. And so as a result, what you end up with is a set of value statements that could be picked up and dropped in another company and they'd still make sense. That's kind of what you're looking to avoid. You want something that only works for you, because that will then help you to attract and retain the right people for your culture. I'd always recommend using value statements rather than single words. So, for example, one of our values is excited by growth. We don't just use the word growth because we think it's more descriptive and it's easier for people to connect to what it means. Whereas single words are inherently very abstract and open to interpretation. Phrases are open to interpretation too, but less so. And then you want to make it real. What does this behavior look like? What's an example of this behavior? What does it mean underneath the statement? What are the different ways it could be demonstrated? Go into lots and lots of detail. So if you're watching the recorded version of this, I'd really encourage you to stop for a second and just think about what are the values in your organization. And if you already have a set of corporate values, do they work for your organization? Are they unique? Are they compelling? Are they really capturing what it is about your culture that people love? Um, from values, once you have those value statements in place, you then want to break them down into behaviors and competencies, because values on their own aren't very useful. You can't really implement them or use them in your processes, but behaviors and competencies are. So start with behaviors. How does someone live in this value behave? What is expected of people? What do you see when if someone's really performing at a high level in relation to that value, what is it that they're doing? How are they operating? And once you've identified those behaviors, you can reward them, you can promote people who display them, and you can make decisions based around those behaviors. And then your next step beyond that is, what are the competencies that make up that behavior? So competencies are officially defined as the knowledge, skills, abilities, and behaviors that contribute to the individual and organizational performance. So that's a broad definition, but essentially, a competency is a skill. It's not necessarily a technical skill. It could be something soft. It could be something in terms of influencing skills or things like that. But a competency is something you can assess. So you use competencies in interviews, in performance reviews, in promotion decisions, and in development plans. And again, these are the ways that you can use values to influence culture. So to give you a bit of an example, as I said, one of our values is excited by growth. And so the behaviors that sit underneath excited by growth are that we take our own development seriously and are proactive about it. We look for new and better ways to do things, achieve outcomes, and deliver for our customers. You can see the others on there. So there's more than this, but these are the sort of main behaviors. And the competency that's attached to that, or one of the competencies that's attached to that, is continuous learning and self-development. So you may not be able to read this. You probably won't be able to read this, but this is actually a competency framework that we've created. Now, this is an incredibly useful tool. You don't need one in your company. It's quite a lot of work to put this together. But the reason I wanted to share this is that you can see each of our values down this left-hand side. And then next to it, you can see the behaviors. We've titled it What This Means to Us. So it's more descriptive. And then associated to each value is a set of competencies. Some of them only have one, some of them have several. And then we've broken that down into different levels of each competency. So if you're in an entry level role, we'd expect people to be displaying those competencies at a level 1. Whereas in leadership roles and executive roles, we'd be expecting them to be trending more towards 5. And so this gives us a real platform for not only assessing how people are performing from a values perspective, but also developing people and helping them to understand what they need to do to get to the next level. So you can go into this much detail with it. You don't necessarily need to, especially in a startup company, but it's a really useful tool to put together. So on our competency of continuous learning and self-development, some of the questions that we might ask at an interview or in a promotion review are things like, when have you taken proactive action on your own development? Tell me more about that. We might say, tell me about a time when you've had to develop a new skill. How did you do that? We might talk to someone about what are your key strengths and how are you currently working on improving them. You'll know when you have a competency because you'll be able to ask questions about it that people will be able to respond with concrete examples to. So when you break them down into competencies, values become a really useful tool for making sure the right people come into your organization, making sure the right behaviors are rewarded, and also making sure that the right people are promoted into positions of more authority. So your foundations are there. Your foundations are around vision, mission, and purpose, and values. Then you have to build your pillars on top of those. So the first pillar is great talent acquisition. You've got to bring the right people into your company. So what does that actually mean? Well, my definition, and this is my definition of great talent acquisition, is you'll know it's in place when you're able to attract people with the right skills for your team, who share your values and are aligned with and engaged with your mission, vision, and purpose. When your hiring process helps you gather the right evidence for making good hiring decisions. when your hiring process also engages candidates and increases their level of interest in your opportunity, because these are two-way decisions that you're driving. When you're able to secure the candidates you want, when you don't have to make lots of offers to people before you manage to secure one, and when the people you hire, most importantly, when the people that you hire perform well in the job that you hire them to do, and they stay with the company. That's the biggest indicator of a great talent acquisition function. It takes a while to gather that data, but these are the elements of what great really looks like. So there are 8 things that drive great talent acquisition. First thing is you've got to gain clarity and alignment. So the biggest factor that we see derailing hiring campaigns is A, the requirements are unclear, and B, there is limited alignment between the hiring team on what those requirements are. So it might be on what those requirements are full stop, or it might be what each part of the requirements actually means. People would have very different definitions of an excellent team player, for example, or they might have different definitions of technical skills as well. So spending a little bit of time making sure each element of your requirements is incredibly clear and that everybody in the hiring team is aligned on what they all mean is step one. Secondly, you've got to create a compelling proposition. You've got to put something together that actually compels people to want to come and work for you. So this is a job advert. It's not a real job advert, but it's not far off. That I found years ago that I always use in this situation. So this is an advert for a plague doctor, and you'll see some of the great elements of this role. Firstly, it's got a really high bar for entry. You know, applicants must be qualified physicians and preferably members of the College of Physicians. Apothecaries need not apply. There's a lot of information about, you know, what the role entails, what the responsibilities are. Some more attractive elements. The role includes the requirement to maintain strict quarantine guidelines and not attend public gatherings. Physicians must carry a white stick to indicate their professional status to the public. Now, very generously, the corporation may pay some expenses, including disinfectant fumigants, lozenges, and a small allowance for a supply of sack, but only for medicinal and preventative purposes. You better not enjoy it. Again, more requirements here. Witnessed and vouchsafed evidence of survival of a previous attack of the deadly pestilence is a distinct advantage and will be looked upon very favorably. I'm not sure how you'd prove that, but you know, again, they're raising the bar just a little bit more. Applicants must understand that the role involves long periods of social exclusion and solitude. The city cannot accept responsibility for the illness or death of the successful applicants, as it's generally known that death rates are running at between 15 and 60%. Now, the only thing that's missing here is that they haven't put at the end, unsuccessful applicants will not be notified. This is obviously an exaggeration, but it's not that far off a lot of the job adverts that I see out there. Most of the job adverts that we see, they're getting better as a whole, but most of the time we see there are a long list of requirements. There might be a sort of perfunctory mention of the benefits of the role, but typically they're done from the point of view of the company. So it's more about, look how great we are. And then there is a very stern, if you're not successful, you won't be contacted. It's a list of demands essentially. And then people wonder why they aren't attracting any applicants to the role. So create a proposition that actually makes people interested, that actually takes into account the candidate's point of view. You know, think about what's in it for someone to come and work for you in this role from their point of view. A good way to think about that is, why will working for you in this role improve their career or improve their life? You know, we do a lot of research here into why people move jobs, and in this sector particularly. And the 4 biggest drivers of people's job moves are career progression, and particularly clarity of career progression. Opportunities to learn and develop. You know, a lot of scientists make up this candidate population, and so you know, you're working with people who have a lifelong passion for learning. Exciting or impactful science and technology, and culture and leadership. So you've got to think about, how do you sell your opportunity in those terms and appeal to the candidates that you're trying to attract. Because this is an advert, it's not a list of requirements. It's not, screening shouldn't start at the point of advertising. Third thing you should bear in mind is, you don't want to just advertise. You want to access the whole market. So if you're just using job adverts, then you're only attracting active job seekers, is what we call them, which typically make up about 20 to 25% of the potential talent pool out there. But a lot of research has been done by LinkedIn into actual sort of people's level of interest in job opportunities. And it's estimated that almost 90% of people are open to opportunities if they're approached in the right way. So if you're only using methods to attract active job seekers, you're tapping into 25% of the talent pool. If you use methods to attract passive talent, then you'll get up to almost 90% of the talent pool. So you're missing out on 2/3, just over, of the people that are available to you if you don't proactively approach people. Now, that can be a lot of work, and there are people that can help you do that, but you should absolutely be leveraging your network at the very least. It's also really critical, once you have applicants in place, to use structured interviewing. So what do I mean by structured interviewing? Well, structured interviews has been shown to be twice as effective as unstructured interviews in assessing people's performance once they're in a job, or predicting people's performance once they're in a job. The problem is they're not used very often, and the reason for that is that everybody thinks they're really great at interviewing. There's very few people are. But a structured interview is essentially an interview where you ask consistently the same questions, competency-based questions, to each candidate. You have scorecards and assign a score to each of the answers that you receive to those questions. And then you hire the candidate that scores the highest, unless you have a very good reason not to. Few caveats to this. I would put the scoring range between 1 and 4 rather than 1 and 5, because otherwise you give people the opportunity to score 3 and sit on the fence. Don't let them score 2.5 either. They have to make a decision as to whether an answer is satisfactory or not. You should absolutely have values-based competencies as part of your assessment, and they should be at least weighted equally with the technical competencies. I would argue weighted more heavily. And you must justify your scoring. If you're challenged in a meeting afterwards, you must be able to justify why you've given this candidate a 4 and this candidate a 1. But use structured interviews, and you'll find your accuracy in decision making is much, much higher, and you won't have to rely on your gut quite so much. You'll gather more evidence because you have to justify the score that you're giving. Really important to assess values fit, and I would recommend doing that before you assess technical fit, because it's more important that someone is right for your company than that they have the right skills. Move quickly is the best piece of advice I can give you if you want to secure the best candidates. People's level of enthusiasm for an opportunity increases when they first hear about it and when they progress to each successive stage. However, the longer it takes for feedback to arrive, the less enthusiastic they become, and enthusiasm eventually plateaus and drops off. So your chances of securing a candidate that you like are much, much lower if it takes you a long time to get back to them. So momentum is really critical in hiring, and I would recommend keeping interview processes as short as possible, scheduling them as quickly as possible, and when you have an open position, make hiring a priority. You'll find it gets filled much more quickly, and you'll spend less time actually hiring people because more of them will accept your offers, and you'll complete each search more quickly. I know everyone's busy, but if you make hiring a priority, you'll spend less time on it. Really important to qualify the candidate and to make a strong offer. What I mean by that is that not everybody is solely interested in money. It's really important to understand what is important to each person. And once you've understood that, then within those criteria, to make them as strong an offer as you possibly can. You want people to, you may not be able to compete with big companies on salary, but you want people to be excited about joining your company, not to begrudgingly agree to join your company. So yes, hiring is expensive, and yes, people are the biggest expense that you will have on your balance sheet, most likely. However, if you want good people to come on board, you have to pay for them. And it's much, much better to pay an extra few grand for someone who's really excited and engaged, than to save a little bit of money and end up with a team that aren't quite as good as they could be or aren't quite as excited as they could be. And finally, pay attention to pre-boarding. So make sure that you stay in touch with the candidate in between when they accept an offer and when they join your company. Too many companies don't do this very well, particularly when people have long notice periods. And I know that I've worked with candidates in the past who've been in situations where they've been offered a job, they've accepted a job, everything's been very busy, everything's happened really quickly. They've got their contracts, they've resigned, they've done all of this stuff. There's a lot of activity. They then have a 3-month notice period, and they find themselves 2 months later sitting there thinking, is this actually, have I made this up? Have I dreamt that this whole thing is happening? Because they've not heard anything from the company for 6-8 weeks. So really, really important to keep in touch, keep holding people's hands until they come and join your company. And if you can get them involved in things that you're doing internally, even better. There's only so much you can ask them to do contractually, and also because you're not paying them yet. But the more involved they are in activities, the more you get them to start contributing to things, the more they'll feel like they're already there, and the more likely it is that they're going to actually turn up in the right place on the right day at the right time and start the job. So, final pillar, the final part of your toolkit before we get onto systems and processes, which I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on because it's very detailed, is brilliant culture and employee experience. So this is about how do you create an amazing experience for people once they are within your company. So I put a question up here of what does a brilliant culture look like? And those of you who've worked in brilliant cultures will find this question very, very easy to answer. Those of you who haven't worked in brilliant cultures won't understand it. So there's lots of different definitions of what a brilliant culture looks like. But the way that we think of it is that in a brilliant culture, you will see high levels of discretionary effort. You'll see low levels of turnover. You'll see lots of examples of development and career progression. You'll see excellent performance, and you'll see a happy, productive team. Every culture is different, and lots of companies achieve this in different ways, but those are kind of the hallmarks of what a brilliant culture is. So how do you actually achieve it? Well, there are 6 elements of this. And we base this on why people move jobs, basically. So these are the things that people look for from their work in the biotech sector. Career development is crucial. And not only do there need to be opportunities for career development, those opportunities need to be clear, and people need to understand what they have to do to take them. So often we see people leave companies not because there isn't opportunity, but because they just don't understand what it is or how to take it. So clarity of career development is really important. And in a small company, it's difficult to give long-term career trajectories a lot of the time because, it's difficult to plan that far out. But you at least need people to understand what their next step is and how to take it. In brilliant cultures, learning becomes a key part of work. So there's not an expectation that everybody's perfect all the time. There's an understanding that people are trying their best. And if you're pushing to perform well, then you may well make mistakes. And so there's a constant focus on improvement and learning and embracing failure and taking lessons from what you're doing. And if you can build that culture, if you can build that environment, then you will, as a group, continually get better at what you're doing and better at executing. In a great culture, everybody's daily activity contributes to the mission, and they fully understand how it contributes to the mission. So they really feel connected to that big picture, that big goal that they're trying to influence. The NASA story, for those of you who don't know it, is a good example of this. So when JFK visited NASA back in the 60s, he was being given a tour, and he asked one of the cleaners, what do you do here? And the cleaner turned around and said, I'm helping put a man on the moon. That's how aligned all the activities there were with what they were trying to achieve. And that's what you want to aim for in your company as well. It's really important that people's personal values are aligned to company values. This should be taken care of through your hiring process if you've done it correctly. But people need to feel that they identify with the company and how the company operates. It can be a really diverse workforce, but there's common ground in values, and that way people work effectively together. This should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's so important. People need to be treated with respect, with fairness, and with compassion. I know that it's difficult when someone has a bereavement, for example, and you've got deadlines to meet, to treat that situation with compassion when everyone's under pressure. But if you can, then you'll find that it really pays out over the long term in terms of loyalty and commitment from that individual. And also, it's the right thing to do. And in a brilliant culture, people have autonomy and input. So you're going to hire smart people. You can tell them what you want them to achieve. Absolutely, you should give them that direction. But try not to make them fit into a very little box of how they achieve it. Let them come with their ideas, let them come with their approaches, let them figure out the best way for them to achieve the things that you're asking them to do. And they may well come up with things that are better than what you would have come up with. So those are 6 elements that create a brilliant culture. So we haven't really touched on systems, processes, and measurement, because the right answer for that really depends on your company, depends on the size of the company, depends on the stage of the company, how complex it is. But essentially, you've got to create a set of processes around things like recruitment, around employee experience, around learning and development, around how you create job specs. This is all basic stuff. But having repeatable processes around that you can continually improve and are documented is really important. And you can use lots of different methods to measure and get feedback. The best is a survey that you can put together that assesses how you perform against values, and gives people an opportunity to feedback what they're thinking, but also just talk to people. Talk to people with the intention of gathering feedback, and let their feedback come. Don't be critical of feedback. Encourage feedback when you receive it. So to recap, there are 3 key pillars of biotech success: science, money, and people. If you want to have a great people pillar, a really fantastic people function in your business, you need a clear vision, mission, and purpose that's compelling. You need values that are used to drive your culture. You need a great talent acquisition function. You need brilliant culture and employee experience. And you need systems, processes, and measurement to make it all work. And that's it. So I hope that's helpful. Happy to take any questions, and use these 5 keys. And if you do have any further questions that come to you later, here are all my contact details. Please do get in touch or come and find me on LinkedIn.